I just feel like it's a very community-driven conference. It also has a lot of quality, and people are just nice. Hi, my name is Sarah, and this is Asian Conf in Dornbirn.
Amazing venue. Austria is beautiful. Meeting all of the people in the community and getting to go and hang out and ski.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, Agent Conf, good morning. Are we caffeinated now? Are we more awake than we were a couple hours ago when you were all silent? Okay, I'm gonna introduce myself more in depth in a little bit, but first I wanna get a little feel. How many people here are developers? Okay, how many of you have made a website? What about like a mobile app, like iOS, Android? Okay, overachievers, fine. Okay, cool. What about like back-end stuff? All right, you can do it all, great. I don't know why I asked. This is me, I'm Ellie. I'm a web engineer at Monzo, which is a bank in the UK, but it's not like a regular bank, it's a cool bank. My Twitter, you can find me on Twitter at EllieBelly. Bonus points for anyone who can get me up here looking professional to show to my parents, and then tweet it at me. And over here in the corner is my life in emoji, and I'm not a narcissist, I promise. This is important later. But I was born in Mexico. Kind of an accident, but here we are. I grew up in Nicaragua. I then moved to the United States to do a bachelor's degree, during which I did a term abroad in China, in Shanghai, very cool. And now I live in London, in the UK, just around the corner. For those of you that were wondering, that's where Nicaragua is. It's a country in Central America, and that's where we are roughly right now. So far, I miss my family. And I'm here to talk to you about internationalization, which I had to practice a lot for this talk, how to say it. What is the deal with it? What's going on? What do we need to know? Has anyone here tried to internationalize an app? I can see. It's a piece of cake, right? Just kidding. It's very complex and very hard, and you can mess it up a lot. So I just want to show you a couple things that will make you prepared to internationalize basically any website. We're going to talk about acronyms and standards. It's going to be a super fun ride, so, you know, get ready. All right. The first thing I want to talk about is this. Internationalization is often written as I-18N, and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about that. This is called a numeronym, which is a number-based word. For example, numbers as sounds like canine from police dog units, or later from texting, I guess. Numbers as meaning. 007 is James Bond. 24/7 means 24 hours, 7 days a week. 911 is often emergency numbers. Even if that's not the actual number, people still like write that for some reason. Also, adding up the number of letters between the first and last and then using that number instead of the middle of the word. Wow, what a good idea. Which you may have seen in stuff like accessibility, which is A11Y, or L10N, which is localization. And then just as a bonus, this is the numeronym for numeronym, in case you ever see that out in the wild. Cool. So what is internationalization? How is it important? Why is it important? And how can I get all of you to care so much about it like I do? So I turned to my most trusted advisor to see how I could convince you that this is so important. And I found statistics. Ooh. On the left here is roughly the language of websites in the world. This is like the top billion or something. And then on the right is internet users by language. So languages of websites is about 52% English, followed far second by Russian. Internet users is about 26% English, followed closely by Chinese. And we're all smart people here. You will notice that these do not match. And that's really where the problem begins, and this is why I find this so interesting. Internationalization is essentially a part of accessibility. As a web developer, if you don't internationalize your site, you're essentially shutting some people out. More people are coming online every day in the world, and it's not usually like the majority English-speaking crowds, because the internet is mostly in English. It's usually people in like Indonesia and, you know, that kind of sort of like developing country thing. So this topic has been super fun for me to learn about. I know it's not as cutting edge as forms, but it's still very important for us to learn about it. So let's hit it. I found this online, which I thought was actually the best definition from W3C standards. If you internationalize, you design or develop your content, application, specification, and so on, in a way that ensures that it works well for or can be easily adapted for users from any culture, region, or language. Two important things here. One is the can be easily adapted for part. A lot of people, when I talk to them about internationalization, they go, I'm a startup, I can't afford that. Or, do I need to get a translator? What's the deal? The truth is that internationalization is a way to build your code. It doesn't mean you have to get a translator right away. It means that your code is flexible to be able to be changed to different regions. And then culture, region, or language is very important because internationalization is not just about translation. There's a ton to think about, which we'll cover later. And it's easy to miss a lot of it. Usually, when you internationalize, you write your code for your website, and then maybe where you have a string, instead of writing the string, you put in a placeholder. That points to like a JSON file somewhere. Sarah loves JSON, by the way. I don't know if you know that. With all of your string resources in that file. That means that when you want to add a second language, you can just point your strings to a second file, and boom, it just changes it. So that's sort of like the rough thing. So for example, if you had a big JSON with ID strings, maybe for a form, you can just refer to them by their ID rather than their content, and then you can just swap out the resource files as an example. And then this is sort of the bigger version of that. And you can do it in templating languages, you can do it in React, and you can do it in plain old JavaScript. So whatever your flavor, it's not hard to internationalize to start with. So what do we have to think about when we internationalize? First is language is sort of the most obvious thing that people jump to. Writing system and line breaks. Not everybody writes with ABCs. You got Thai, you got Chinese. Encoding is a big part of this. Form inputs are a big part of this. If you have an umlaut in your name, you might not be able to submit any form ever, which is, I mean, have you ever been through that, where it's like, this isn't a real name because it doesn't use the right letters? Because that's happened to me, yeah, a couple of people. Dates, times, and currencies. Is anyone here American? What date is this? Yeah, I thought so. Ordering, pluralization changes a lot between languages and regions. Grammar and sentence structures. The order of verbs and nouns can swap over, and that, if you try to sort of build your own sentences, that can really get you. And then relative time, like days ago, like when you do a comment on GitHub, or sometimes I've seen on GitHub like 23 seconds from now, which baffles me. I don't know if anyone's ever seen that. And then as a bonus, which I'm not going to talk too much about, there's color theory and responsive design, just because the sizes of things vary between languages and character sets. Also, for example, different colors. In many countries, red is a lucky, auspicious color. Their React Native apps must be buggy as hell. You know what I'm saying? So, piece of cake, right? Just a couple things to keep in mind. Yes, but it's this cake with sparkles and glitter and roses and 1,000 tears. So you know what? I made my own cake because I'm an optimist, and this is the internationalization cake with all the different bits that you need to have a good base to do it on the web. Some of these are optional because they're libraries. I get people message me be like, why don't you use this other library which I wrote? I'm like, I'm sure it's great. This is just the one I know, so this is the one I'm going to teach you. So, first thing that's important is Unicode. Unicode is amazing. Unicode gave us UTF-8 encoding, which means that every character in the world has a number. Unicode gave us emoji. And really, I think that's just priceless. So we can write on the internet in any script we want. But Unicode is also in charge of a few other things. Their mission is to develop and promote the consortium, develop and promote the use of the Unicode standard, but also related globalization standards. They're in charge of the CLDR and ICU technical committees, which I'm going to teach you what they are. They're super cool, and it's all under the Unicode umbrella. They're in charge of bidirectional text, so if you need to write something in Arabic or Hebrew, they got you. They also just redid their homepage, which is a miracle because their website was so ugly, and it just warms my heart. Let's talk about directional text, because we're talking about Unicode. In Unicode encodings, each character that you type is either strongly or weakly typed with a direction. So maybe something in Arabic is strongly typed as right to left, maybe an English letter or a Western letter is typed left to right, and then stuff like exclamation points are weakly typed, so they could go either way. They're, the bi characters. So, for example, this is the word for Egypt in English and in Arabic, and all these characters are typed. Now, Unicode has this algorithm that learns how to display the characters based on the base direction of your document. When you write HTML, you can tell it what direction your document is going. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, if it's a right-to-left language, surely it knows. The problem is when you need to mix both. So you need to go in both directions. So let's say you were writing an article in English, but you want to reference a book title in Arabic. How does the internet know which direction to show your text? So we can tell it with a dir attribute, dir for direction, left to right. We have 3 words there. You'll notice that the word for Egypt is still in the same direction that it's coded up here, but the words are left to right. If we change the base direction of the file, the words are written right to left, the English words are still written left to right, and then the Arabic word is sort of going with the document. So, hot tip, if you are in any point using bidirectional text, make sure you add the appropriate HTML tags to help out Unicode figure out how to show your text, otherwise you could get some really nasty bugs. So, hot tip. While researching this talk, I found out there is something called the Internet Engineering Task Force, which is amazing. In my head, it looks like this, but let's be honest, it doesn't. They publish these things called the best common practices. Whoops, too far. Best common practices, which are sort of like standards. My favorite best common practice from them, or BCP, is number 47, which shows us how to write tags for identifying locales. A locale is a combination of a language in a region and a couple of other sort of sub-classifications that tell us what that user wants to see based on their language region. So the specification says you need first a language tag, which is usually 2 letters, a dash, and then 1 or more subtags based on the region. So up top, we have EN, which is English as spoken in the US, or English as spoken in Great Britain. The second one is MN Mongolian, as written in the Cyrillic alphabet, as spoken in Mongolia. The third is ZH is Chinese, for Zhongwen, I think, as written in the traditional character set, as opposed to the simplified character set. They're completely different, as spoken in Hong Kong, HK. And the last one, ES, is Spanish, Español. 419, which is actually a number code for a region. So 419 is Latin America and the Caribbean, which is where I'm from, woo-woo, represent. And so it's not always that same pattern of a specific country, it can be a region. So if you remember my super self-indulgent life story over here, these are all of my locales, in theory. So if I log onto your website as me with this information, what are you going to show me? And really, that's one of the hardest parts of internationalization. So, and if you take anything away from this talk, is this. Always, always let your user choose their own locale. You don't know if they're traveling, you don't know if they're immigrants, you don't know if they're learning a language. You can't just assume, especially not based on browsers, especially not based on an IP address. So always, always let your user choose their own locale. Nailed it. Great. Okay, this is one of my favorite parts of the things that I learned for this talk. The CLDR is the Common Locale Data Repository, which is 24 megabytes of XML that you can download for free on the internet. It's open source, and it has all of the information for every language / locale about a ton of stuff. So, days of the week, names of months, time zones. Does the calendar start on a Monday or does it start on a Sunday? What's the writing direction? How do you capitalize things? What are the names of the cities of the world in that language? All of that stuff you can just zip file download from the Unicode website. And it's thrilling. Now, obviously, as web developers, we don't work with XML very much. Neither do anyone else, basically. Nobody wants to. So usually, the CLDR is wrapped by like many layers of libraries. But here's an example from when I downloaded last. This is days of the week in Spanish. You'll notice like the XML tags are in English because that's the language of the internet. And so you have the abbreviated versions, the sort of short 2-letter versions, and then the wide, full word down there. And you can do this for any language. Just download it. It's great. Impress your friends. If you did want to play with this, they have it all as JSON on GitHub. That's just a fun fact. I'd be careful, but fine. The other thing that Unicode is in charge of, besides the CLDR and the bidirectional text, is the ICU. Now, the ICU started as a wrapper for the CLDR repository, and it's actually C++ and Java libraries, which I know doesn't help us at all. However, they did define a message format for writing strings in your string resource files. So remember earlier when I was like, you could just have a JSON and then point your strings to that JSON? You can actually do a little more than just have strings in those resource files, and I'm going to show you how to use it right now. So you can pass in a value, welcome, and then a name, and then it says, it's a template. You know how that works. You can also give it a value and a type. So the green part is a variable which you give it, and then number is like you actually write the word number. And then that's how it knows, usually libraries or whatever, how to format what you've written. So some people use commas for 1,000 separator, some people use periods. You can also tell it options. So you have a value, a type, and then further options as to how you want that printed out. You can also do selects. So, if you like trains like I do. And you can also use plurals. So when they say like, oh, inbox 0, you don't have any more messages, or you have 1 message or 3 messages, you would write it something like this. Is anyone here Russian? Cool, okay. So, and I don't speak Russian, but in Russian, there's not just like singular and plural. There's like one word for one thing, and there's another word for like 2 to 5 things, and then there's like other words for like 5 to 11 things, something like that. So this, in the Russian file, has many more lines, which is why it's helpful to have it external as a JSON resource. When you actually have a full app full of these types of templates with the ICU message format, some things to think about. 1, write full sentences when possible. Do not try to build sentences yourself, like article plus verb plus noun. Do not do that. It's a rabbit hole. And then use this complex arguments, like the select and the plural, as the outermost structure of a message. Now, the biggest problem I have seen with this is that this is usually written by developers. And developers hate repeating themselves. And internationalization string formats require, in best practice, that you repeat yourself a ton. So fight the urge to abstract common patterns out. I've seen it a million times. It never goes well. And I'll show you an example. Let's say we have a sentence, and it's a user, and they're logged in, and maybe they told you, like, a gender field. And so you can have an option for male, female, or other, like non-binary, and you say, that's fine, I'll just switch on that. The problem is, if you read this with the they pronoun, that is a singular pronoun, which means that for this to be correct, it would have to say they like to dance, not they likes. So already, we're screwed. So that's not gonna work. So you say, it's fine, I'll just put the verb inside. Easy peasy, right? Because then I don't have to repeat the line every time because I'm a developer and I learned this. And this is fine in English, but the second you move to any languages that gender verbs or that flip around verbs and nouns, of which there are many, this breaks down like that. So that's not really gonna work. The correct way to do it is this. Full sentences, repeated. Ooh, I know, but you have to do it, trust me. Because your translators and your files will have the maximum flexibility for this. JavaScript alert. This is the part where it gets fun. Turns out, JavaScript has an internationalization API already baked in, which is great for us. It's also in development, so if you want to contribute, you can find that. It's ECMA 402. And this is how it works. You create a new instance of intel, and then there's a date time formatter, a number formatter, and then I think a collator, which is what does the ordering and alphabetizing. You initialize it with a locale, a BCP47 locale. JA is Japanese. You then pass it options. So do you want a currency? Fun fact, in Japan, they don't use cents. So the API knows that. And then if it's a currency, what currency code? And that's a whole different standard. And then once it's created, you can say .format and then pass it in the number you want to format. Same with dates. You can give it all these options. Problem is, especially in React where you re-render stuff a ton, the overhead for like maintaining this is super high. So if you had to create a formatter for each different locale, each different set of options, if you wanted a shorter date somewhere else on your site, you would need to create a whole new one. So it's not ideal. It's also like supported fine, but not all the way. So there's like a polyfill situation, and it's expensive. It is a work in progress. These are the things you can Google if you're interested to see what they're coming up with. There's some really cool stuff in the pipeline, a couple of years maybe. And this is sort of like never not gonna be a thing, which is great. And also the disclaimer that I'm using the library I'm using because I used it before, not because I think your library is bad. So there's a library called Format.js. It's built by Yahoo, it's open source. It has bindings for React, Ember, Handlebars, and Dust. And it has a lot of React components that you can use to do formatting of strings, so translations, dates, numbers, currencies, and then some other assorted like packages for like relative time and stuff like that. In React, it just looks like this. You import a component, formatted message. You give it an ID, which is the ID of your string in your JSON file. You can give it a default message if you want, because sometimes the JSON files aren't on the same version. And then you can also pass it in values that will get filled in those little templates we learned about with the ICU message format from Unicode. I have found it helpful in my projects to make the IDs sort of like be very descriptive. If you want, you can also make them like co-located and then like webpack them later, but I'm not about that life. This is an example of what a string resource file might look like with the ICU message format conditionals. We got some templates at the top. We got a complex select plus, what is it, pluralization down here. And this is Spanish text and English IDs. If you don't want to use React, you can use format.js just as a plain JavaScript. Intel.forMessage, you just npm install it, it's great. Those are the bits of the cake. Yay, however. Internationalization has a logistics problem. And that's really what bites big teams sometimes, even small teams. So let's say you build an app, and then you internationalize, and then maybe a year later, you're like, you know what, we're ready to launch in other languages. So I'm gonna go and get my strings translated by like, I don't know, a freelancer or a company, and then I'm gonna deploy my site. Now, I wanna add a feature. So I need to get the strings for the new feature translated, and then maybe some of my languages are ready, but maybe the Portuguese translator is on vacation. So do I wait for them to come back and finish? Do I deploy my site knowing that it's not gonna be complete for one of the languages? And then while I'm deciding that, what if somebody else adds a different feature? And then they're ready to deploy because all their languages are there. Do I wait for them? Do they wait for me? Do I release an incomplete situation? What if I want to change one of the strings that's already in the old features? You know? So there's this concept now of continuous localization, which is how you basically integrate localization into your dev workflow so that it's automatic and seamless and does not cause any of this, should I wait for them, should they wait for me, conflicts. This is mostly like a lot of like software as a service companies do this. I used to use one called Smartling that would like read your commits, do the translations, and then commit back into your PRs, which was pretty cool. Not free, disclaimer. So because of all of this, internationalization is much easier to integrate into your project early. It's much harder to retrofit. And like I mentioned before, if you internationalize, that doesn't mean you have to translate stuff right away. It just means that your code is flexible. A lot of companies don't really think of this, and they say, you know what, that's a problem for later, and then it takes twice or thrice as long. And I'm gonna give you an example of this. I used to work at a company based in the UK called Trainline. Trainline sells train and bus tickets across Europe. It works here. And we decided we wanted to have something like 12 currencies and like 16 languages. And so when you went on to like, you searched like London to Paris or whatever, we would automatically pick the cheapest ticket and give you a little pop-up that said, we've selected a ticket based on the cheapest price, you're welcome. When we added German, we had a problem because German has super long words. And we went, crap, we did not think of this. So we investigated, we put a team on it. Turns out it was just like a fixed height somewhere in the CSS. So we got rid of that. Boom, problem solved, German fits, great. Now, that was the easy one. Trainline started as a UK-only thing, and the UK train system is very complicated. So the easiest way to display tickets was as a grid. All the columns were times of departure, and all the rows were types of ticket, of which there are many. And then we could show you which ones were cheaper, which ones had limited availability. You'll notice, however, that that limited availability is just like a little toit. It's fine still, but like it's still a little like, ugh. Then the boss came down and was like, we need to show this in French and also in Swedish krona. Now notice that this is pounds. We've lost the currency symbol, you'll notice. The limited availability is like, cannot breathe. It's like, oh my God. The only solution we can find to this internationalization problem was putting a team of 6 people for 2 months to turn this into that. Because now we have room for all the messaging, all the currency symbols, inflation. If you've ever tried to sell something in like, whatever, Venezuela, yeah, thank you. It would be like 3,500,000, whatever. And like, does that fit? So integrate internationalization as early as you can to avoid surprises, to avoid time sinks. Be long-term greedy, like Jared said. Yeah, so that's important tip. Now, the rest of these are like fun tips, but please research them before you use them. You can style for specific languages in CSS, but there's browser issues, so be careful. There's a pseudo-selector, :lang, and then you put in a language code, which is the 2 letters. This is really helpful sometimes for like when you're doing quotes. That's like the most common example. So for example, if you want to quote somebody, in English you do the sky commas. And then in French or German, you can use the little carets, which is great. In your CSS, you just pass in a language code, and then you can decide what you want to show. I've never had to use this, but if you do, just know it's there. This is super fun. This is a fun fact. Line breaks. Not all languages have line breaks or spaces between words. So Khmer text, which is like Thai, does this too. There's no spaces in the words. These lines are everywhere where you could reasonably break the text. But how does a computer know that? It's actually a hard problem. It hasn't been solved in like a good way yet. There's a lot of sort of like look-ahead dictionary lookup types of things. So if you're like writing or if you're a native speaker, you know where it feels right to do those breaks. But for a computer, real hard. I put a link at the bottom, and I'll share the slides of more information about this line break problem because it's fascinating. So what have we learned so far? 1, internationalization is part of accessibility. Internationalize all the things. It doesn't have to be a huge effort if you start early. And you're really opening the doors to more people around the world. And isn't that really what the internet is about? It's supported by a bunch of standards, mostly from the Unicode consortium. But even just knowing what to Google helps do it right. Because maybe what you feel like doing intuitively, like the do not repeat yourself thing, might not be the right thing. So it's good to familiarize yourself with the standards. Also, these standards, by the way, are not just for the web. They apply also to sort of like mobile development and documentation, that kind of thing. Try to start early if you can. It's much harder to retrofit. Always, always, always let your user. You got it. You guys are superstars. Also, and I understand this is a fun crowd for this, if you're not already starting from it, German is a great first test language because it will 100% break your website if you start it, 100%, if you started from any other language. I've been Ellie. Tweet at me. I'll be around at the breaks. Thank you.